Okay, so my case was on a misfit long-term hearing aid user that established care at our clinic. Here is an audiogram, and I'll kind of talk through it a little bit. But just to give you a little bit of background information, this was a long-term hearing aid user who established care with our clinic in 2016 and then did not return for 2.5 years. The patient's speech understanding steadily was decreasing, and he was starting to get frustrated. Patient wants to know if there's anything that he can do, if at this point new technology would help him. He was told by an outside audiologist that new technology would not help him. So he kept his old hearing aids. And he did have better speech discrimination. Like I said, it's been steadily decreasing. The hearing aids could not meet targets at their limits after real ear measures were run on full adaptation. The patient had been seen for several hearing aid follow-ups to work through current issues and limitations of his hearing aids. And I thought that this case was relevant because it helps us understand a patient's needs and some different personalities, and also taking over care from previous clinics and addressing limitations of the hearing aids and really counseling the patient. So this patient was 93 years old. He's been a long-term hearing aid user. He was wearing Phonak Savia Art DSZ BTEs with slim tubes. In 2016, this patient was referred to our clinic for an updated hearing test. His history was known as the following. He had a known sensorineural hearing loss, which patient states it had begun to decrease significantly over that last year, so 2015 to 2016. He has especially noticed an increased difficulty understanding speech and background noise, which is a very common complaint. He had a feeling of fullness and plug sensation, which he relates to his changes in his hearing. Patient was an aircraft engine mechanic and an electrician for a year, and also grew up shooting shotguns. He reports that he has never worn hearing protection. Patient has redness and irritation on the right pinna that he relates to his psoriasis, which is dry skin. He reports that these hearing aids were the first and only pair of devices, and notes that he receives minimal benefit from them and has experienced difficulties with background noise, plays, television, and everyday conversation. So then skip to January 2017. Our clinic did an audiogram then, and he had 70% speech understanding on the right ear and 68% speech understanding on the left ear. And that had changed what he thought about the hearing aids once the audiologist at the time reported that new technology could help improve his hearing and quality of life. Patient reports that he was overall satisfied with the hearing aids and he did not want to pursue anything new, even though the audiologist did recommend that at that time something could help him. Patient lived far away and stated that he would continue to care with his current providing audiologist, so he didn't want to travel to our clinic, and he was just coming for an updated hearing test and didn't want any further services. So then, 2.5 years later, he shows back up after not seeing him in January of 2020, and this is kind of when I started seeing this patient. So everything else was back in the charts. So in January of 2020, he came for a hearing test, and this is the audiogram that was done. So he was very frustrated. He came in very frustrated and wanted to know if there was anything that he could do to understand more and if it's time for new hearing aids. He states that he cannot understand his wife at all or the TV. So here, as you can see, both ears have a mild to severe sensorineural hearing loss, and his speech discrimination has dropped in the right ear from 70% to 56%, and then 64% from 68% in the left ear. And we're kind of at his UCLs. He couldn't tolerate anything louder. So this took a lot of counseling. So a hearing aid recheck followed this audiogram. And I'm going to scroll down here a little bit. Here is kind of the measurements that we took here. So the hearing aid recheck followed the audiogram and showed that the real ear measures had never been completed, and he was on adaptation 2 of 4. So he explained to us like he couldn't understand anything, he's having minimal benefit, and then we go into the programming and they're completely not fit correctly. So patient was extensively counseled on being correctly stimulated and what that can do for you. Real ear measures were completed and hearing aids are at their limitations at this point. So below or right here, what I'm showing you is the real ear measures match to target with the hearing aids on adaptation 404, and the high frequencies are at their capacity. So as you can see, even at the limitations and at the capacity, in those higher frequencies, we're not meeting targets at all. So also when we turned it up to adaptation 404 and these high frequencies up, he instantly said that they were too loud and that he couldn't handle that much because he's been understimulated for so long. So after the patient was fed as close to targets as possible, he returned to the clinic 3 times within 2 weeks, like I said, asking for volume or programming adjustments because things were just too loud and they still were not clear. So he brought his wife in to a hearing aid recheck, and she had stated she was encouraging him to move forward with new technology so that his hearing aids could encompass at least his hearing loss. And we talked a lot about clarity versus loudness, and even with new hearing aids, it may be better because it can encompass and it won't be at the limitations, but that he will still be struggling, especially in background noise. So at that point, he refused to move forward with new hearing aids. After the 3rd visit and some fine-tuning adjustments and counseling, the patient decided that he would move forward with a new set of BTE hearing aids. Patient again was counseled on his current speech understanding scores and the ability to have room for programming for his type and degree of hearing loss. So at this point, I hadn't seen him for the fitting yet. So over the past 3 years, his thresholds have stayed stable, but his word recognition scores have steadily decreased, causing increased frustration for him and a lot more counseling on our end for him to understand what was happening. I felt that this case was really relevant because he came in certain he was not looking for anything new. His hearing aids were fine, but he didn't know what the best option was for him. He didn't know that he was being understimulated or that he was being misfit, essentially. The patient has gone back and forth between our clinic and his previous clinic, and I think it made this gap in care and didn't allow us to fully encompass everything that he needed, but they couldn't either because he was kind of going back and forth, which made things difficult. So this brings me to lead kind of a discussion. Throughout this process, I think that I learned running real ear measurements and giving the patient a visual. That showed him, and I think that kind of convinced him to go forth with new hearing aids, just seeing that we couldn't even meet his targets at the limitations of his old hearing aids. That allowed him to select something a little bit more powerful moving forward. And then also, I was reading some articles about real ear measurements and just how important they are, and how when information is being delivered to the tympanic membrane, that allows the wearer to maximize the potential benefit. So doing those real ear measures is super important. This also allowed me to kind of understand establishing care a little bit better and filling in gaps in information because we were not given any previous records. We were just kind of taking what he had said. So we didn't get to start from the very start, and he kind of already came in frustrated with us and then left and then came back. So this allowed me to work on my counseling skills, but it also allowed me to understand how to best explain to him his hearing loss and that the speech understanding we need to preserve as much as possible, but we couldn't do that with the hearing aids that he was in because we were at those limitations, and just how important certain services are for him, like running real ear measurements. I would say a weakness that we had was overall the resources for the patient. Like I said, we didn't receive any outside records and didn't work with the other clinic at all. And so we had minimal information. So it'd be nice to be able to fill in those gaps. So kind of an overall takeaway from from this here is this was a 93-year-old patient who has been a long-term hearing aid user. He established care in our clinic in 2016, and he was underfit in 2009 at a different clinic. Throughout this time span, his speech understanding scores have steadily decreased, and he has become very frustrated but resistant to change. Throughout our care, we have tried to work with his needs and also achieving the best fit to targets that we can. He actually was fit with a new pair of BTEs about a month ago, and he's doing really well with them. He still is frustrated and not understanding as much as he wants to be, but I think that they're more comfortable for him, and the sound quality and clarity is a lot better, especially just with the newer sound processing and the hearing aids today. So moving forward, always do real ear measures, counsel your patients and understand their background, and just allow them to be frustrated, but just counsel them as best as you can.